Welcome back to Trail of Tuesdays. It's Halloween. That one night when ghost stories, odd legends, and unsettling history seem to come a little closer to our world. And today's tale, it feels part horror movie, part absurdist comedy, and yet it really happened. It was the summer of 1518 in Strasbourg, when one morning a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. The problem is that she didn't stop. Not after an hour, not after a day, not even after a week. And before long, others joined her, dancing until their feet bled and their bodies gave out from exhaustion. This is the story of the dancing plague of 1518. It began in July 1518 with one woman, Frau Troffe. She was a working-class resident of Strasbourg, the wife of a craftsman, living an ordinary life in a crowded medieval city. Until one morning, she stepped onto the cobblestones outside her home and began to move to a rhythm no one else could hear. There was nothing graceful or joyful about the dance. It looked almost mechanical, like someone caught in a motion and she could no longer stop. She danced through the day, and before long, a crowd of neighbors had gathered. By nightfall, she was still at it, and by morning, still moving. Her husband begged her to stop, to rest, but she couldn't. Chronicles would later describe her movements as wild, ceaseless, and pale with exhaustion. After nearly a week, the authorities intervened. They carried her some 30 miles to the shrine of Saint Vitus, hoping that the saint would lift whatever curse had taken hold. But it was too late. The sight of a strange, relentless dancing had already spread, and within a week, more than 30 people had joined in. When prayers and pilgrimages to St. Vitus failed to calm the dancers, the city turned from the church to science. The doctors didn't suspect witchcraft or demons. Instead, they diagnosed a condition they called hot blood. In the world of 16th century medicine, it was all about balance. People believed the body was ruled by 4 fluids or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. To have hot blood meant your inner fire had run wild. Your body was literally overheating and your pulse was racing. And the cure those doctors prescribed was simple. Let the dancers move until the heat burned itself out. So, the council ordered that any halls would be turned into dance floors. They hired musicians to keep the rhythm going, believing it will help the afflicted burn away the sickness. But the cure only made things worse. The music drew even more people, and onlookers began to believe they were witnessing divine punishment from Saint Vitus. In fear or devotion, some started moving too. Within a month, estimates suggest the number of dancers may have approached 400. And as the dancing went on for weeks with no sign of stopping, eyewitnesses began to write about what they saw. People with torn clothes, bleeding feet, and faces frozen in grimace and pain. Soon, the spectacle turned dangerous when dancers began to collapse where they stood, their bodies giving out one by one. Some were carried away, others, it was said, died from exhaustion, strokes, or heart failure. Though the historians note the exact death toll was never formally recorded, and that part perhaps has grown a little with retelling. Finally, after science actually made things worse, in this case, the city turned back to fate. Those still afflicted were gathered and taken once more to a shrine of Saint Vitus in a nearby town. There, priests prayed over them for days, sprinkling holy water and pleading with the saint to release them. Slowly, the frenzy stopped, and at last, the streets of Strasbourg fell silent again. For centuries, historians were puzzled over what truly caused the dancing plague. How could hundreds of people in the heart of an European city suddenly lose control of their own bodies and dance for days on end? There are two main theories. The first points to ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye. When consumed in bread, it can cause muscle spasm, convulsions, and even hallucinations. Symptoms that, on the surface, seem to echo what the dancers of Strasbourg experienced. The fungus contains chemical compounds related to those later synthesized into LSD, which is why some writers have connected ergot poisoning to outbreaks of delirium, even speculating it might have played a role in the Salem witch trials a century later. And in the hot, wet summer of 1518, it's not hard to imagine rice stores turning moldy. Food was scarce, and the city's poor would have eaten whatever bread they could find. It could explain it, at least at first glance. Because historians today are a little more cautious. Ergot poisoning also causes constricted blood flow, numbness, and violent convulsions. These symptoms would have made it hard for anyone afflicted to move for long, let alone sustain the steady rhythmic dancing described by the eyewitnesses. As historian John Waller notes, ergotism victims could hardly stand still, let alone dance for days. So, while the poisoned bread theory seemed plausible at first, when viewed through the lens of modern medicine, it doesn't quite fit the facts. The second theory, it's less chemical and more psychological, and perhaps a little more chilling. It's what modern scholars call mass psychogenic illness or collective hysteria. In essence, it's when shared fear or belief manifests in the body. Anxiety spreads like contagion, and people begin to experience the same symptoms, not through infection, but through emotion. And in 1518, Strasbourg was the perfect stage for anxiety to take hold. The city was reeling from famine, failed harvests, and rising grain prices. Outbreaks of smallpox and syphilis were present, and people lived under constant religious pressure. In such an atmosphere, the sight of one woman moving uncontrollably through the streets might have been enough to awaken that collective fear. A few watchers began to feel it too, a twitch, a tremor, a need to move. And once the city council built stages and hired musicians, the movement only escalated. As John Waller notes, the dancing mania reflected the desperate psychological state of people crushed by famine, disease, and the conviction that God was angry with them. So, perhaps, the dancers weren't bewitched or poisoned, but overwhelmed in their bodies, acting out the stress and terror of their times. In the end, whether it was poison, fate, or fear that set it in motion, the dancing plague remains one of history's strangest reminders of how fragile the human mind can be. That was the Trail of Tuesdays Halloween special, the Dancing Plague of 1580. Thanks for listening and for wandering down the stranger paths of history with me. If you'd like to support the show and hear more stories like this one, join us on Patreon, where members get bonus episodes, early access, and our After the Trail reflections. And as always, stay safe and stay curious.